Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to Winter League's afternoon panels, and we are going to be talking about the sports media. So the next panel is going to be the evolving landscape of sports media embracing digital transformation. And here are our important guests are Alexandra Vizor from FIFA Fan Moment Sports Content Editor, please. Our next guest is Jonathan Mark Wilson, Project Manager of Confidential and also author of 11 books, including Inventing the Pyramids. Welcome. And our next guest is Semra Hunter. She's a football presenter in La Liga in ITV. Please, Selma. Thank you. And our moderator is going to be Aykut Aydın, News Manager in Desmart. So the stage is yours.
I'm just checking everybody's sitting the right place. Önce ben bir Türkçe açılış yapayım. Hepiniz hoş geldiniz. Burada önemli konukları ağırlıyoruz. Futbol dünyasından spora her konuda ilgi gösteren, bilimsel çalışmalar yapan birçok önemli konuk var. Ama ben şu anda o kadar mutluyum ki aynı dili konuştuğum ve aynı mesleği yaptığım kişilerle sahnede olacağız. Ve umut ediyorum ki sadece Türkiye'de değil, dünya genelinde ve Avrupa'daki örnekleriyle geleneksel medyadan dijital medyaya dönüşümü burada hep birlikte değerlendireceğiz. Önce onlara bir teşekkür ederek başlayalım. Umarım keyif alırsınız. İnteraktif bir sohbet olacak bizimkisi. Katkı sağlarsanız da çok mutlu olurum. Let's start then. First of all, thank you everybody. We are very happy, especially I just tell them about this is a big convention, but I am very happy because of this panel, because we are in the same business and talk the same language, especially. So, for a media, we are in a big transformation, and let's start with Semra.
Oh boy. Only joking.
I want to ask, did you feel this transformation from traditional media to digital media? Because we are nearly in the same age, so we both experienced the traditional media and digital media both. How can you describe it?
Oh, that's a very good question. So I've been working in broadcast media for 10 years now, and the landscape has changed dramatically in a decade. And every single day, you do feel the impact of digital transformation, especially on more traditional methods of broadcasting. You know, I work in television predominantly. And you can see that the change, or to adapt and to include more of a digital focus, is very slow. Sometimes there's a lot of reticence. A lot of people want to stick to what's worked until now. And so there's not exactly always a desire to embrace the fact that this is where we are headed. There has to be digital transformation. Whether we like it or not, this is going to happen. And so I think for us as traditional broadcasters, it can sometimes be very difficult, because now we're competing with anyone and everyone. Everyone can have a voice on social media. Everyone can have an account on social media. Anyone can have something to say. Whereas before, traditionally, the methodology was you would have a broadcaster who would buy the rights. They would be the ones to show it. They knew that they could captivate audiences because it was a one-stop shop. It was the one place people had to go if they wanted to watch live football or live sport or whatever. It was what was on offer. But now, the market, I know you're going to talk about this, is so fractured. People have so many different ways of consuming sport now on so many different platforms that it can be very difficult to compete for attention, for quality content, for trying to get people to come and watch whatever it is that you're producing with you. Because we're not competing just with other networks anymore. You're competing with OTT platforms, you're competing with Netflix, with Amazon, with series, with movies, with everything else. And so the way that now sport is being consumed is so incredibly different than it was 10 years ago. And so it's quite an interesting change that we are seeing happen, I
We had
think.
too many
But-
rivals now.
What's that?
We had too many rivals
There
now.
are too many, yeah. And also the attention spans are a lot shorter, aren't they? It's really hard for people to sit and watch a football game for 90 minutes. And the way that they consume it is they want to tune in the peak moments, when there's a goal, whenever there's a penalty, when there's something exciting happening. So to try and keep people engaged, to try and keep people actively involved and to have them stick around and watch you provide the analysis before or after a match, it can be a little bit tricky now.
Thank you. I want to continue with Jonathan, and I want to ask him, for the past years, maybe 20 years before or 30 years before, it's very hard to find a place in traditional media, to work for a big newspaper or to work for a big television company. But now I think people who owns the big studios or big television companies try to find someone, but the people who they offered some contract, they didn't accept because they want to be individual and they want to make their own job. Do you agree this one?
Yeah, there's definitely an element of that. I mean, I think the point you make about the one-stop shop, that's obviously true in television, but it's also was true in print media, which is what I know much more about. So I started in 99, this is 25 years ago, when essentially you still had 12, in the UK, you had 12 national newspapers, and they ranged from highbrow to tabloid, and you took your pick according to your political persuasion, according to what level of analysis you wanted. And I think it was relatively easy to sell advertising in that market because you had we sell 800,000 copies or whatever. But now that market is fractured, and there are benefits to that. So I set up a magazine, The Blizzard, in 2011, which is quarterly, it's long form, it's often quite niche subjects. It would have no mass market appeal, but thanks to social media, we can market that, and there's enough of an audience that we don't make a profit, but we don't make a loss either. But if you're The Guardian, for instance, my newspaper, that is a much harder transition to manage. The move to websites, still nobody knows how to make money out of websites, unless they're getting enormous traffic. But for even a popular newspaper like The Guardian, making a profit through advertising is much harder now than it was 25 years ago. I think TV is facing a similar problem with streaming. The advertising on streaming is much lower. Partly because everybody knows exactly how many people are reading each thing. And it's quite disheartening when I was writing just for the newspaper, you say, our circulation is 500,000. 500,000 people are reading me. But then you actually see the figures, how many people have clicked on your piece, and it might be the most read thing on the website, and it's 45,000 people have clicked on it, and 5,000 actually got to the bottom. And you realize the market's actually much smaller than you thought because of that fragmentation. So I understand that some journalists, I don't think we're seeing it quite so much in the UK, but it's happening with some people, that those who have the big personal followings, the big personal brands, for some of them it does make sense to set up a Substack or something like that. And they can, with actually relatively few subscribers, make more money than you were making from a newspaper or from a website. So that idea of these brands being broken up, I think, is definitely something that is current, something that's happening. And that presents all kinds of ethical dilemmas, because how do you make a noise? How do you attract people to yourself? Well, the more extreme your view, then the bigger ramifications, the bigger the reverberation, the more people you're going to draw in. And what we've really seen since the pandemic, since lockdown, is almost invariably right-wing, some very far left-wing, conspiracy theory, people appealing to that end of the spectrum, and often without the checks and balances, without the ethical approach that we as journalists would take and should take.
Thank you. And I will continue with Alexandra, and I want to ask her. Hopefully you can add on something also, Semra and Jonathan. The first thing, it is global. To be a part of media, to work for media, it doesn't matter to be a journalist or to be a presenter. We have to be objective. Objectivity is the first thing, first rule. But I think with the transformation to the digital media from traditional media, we are about to lose our objectivity. Do you in the same mind with me? And what happened in Netherlands also?
Yeah, I agree. I think my work is a part of this digital transformation because I'm a sports media content creator. So I work in sports social media. And the thing you mentioned is actually really common, especially for hosts for different and particular football clubs. So for example, I was working in Legia Warszawa for 3 years as a host. And of course, if you're working for this club, you can only say that you love this club and nothing but this club. You can't be a fan of any other club. It's also a part of fans culture. In Poland, it is really common, I would say. And I was actually surprised. I didn't know that when I first came into the club. And I was obviously having my own social media as well. And as soon as my face appeared in the social media of Legia, my boss had a conversation with me that from now on, as I'm a host of Legia, I can't talk anything about politics on my personal profile. So I can't say anything. It's not even about the objectivity in sports, but also about the objectivity in general. Like in politics, for example, in Poland, I couldn't say honestly anything. So I kind of lost my right to speak in some ways, and that was really bothering me. So I left the club. That was one of the things. And as a freelancer now, I have more...
much more comfortable.
Much more comfortable. I feel much more comfortable. And it's mostly, I would say, for if you work for a particular club or organization in football, but in general, as a journalist as well, I'm not a journalist, but I see when I'm creating content, for example, I'm doing videos and I see how journalists make interviews. And if you say something wrong, it's not wrong, it's objective, but for example, it's a question which player doesn't like, then most likely next time he won't come to you for the interview. And this is really wrong because there should be a right, I mean, not a right, but the obligation of the player to come for an interview because it's a part of their job. But actually now I see that sometimes they really just don't come and they don't have any penalty for that, and for me, they should.
Thank you. And also, I will ask Semra what's going on in Spain. Is it same? Maybe you can add USA also.
I guess I could say that I have a bit of a unique point of view in the sense that I live in Spain. I'm originally from the States, but I've been living in Spain for 16 years. But I also do a lot of work in the UK and with UK media and networks and so on. So I've seen very different things happening in both countries. In Spain, for example, I would say that there is more of a tendency now to follow people on Twitch like Ibai, who is super famous. Everybody wants to follow what he has to say, and traditional media is having a very difficult time competing with that. And part of it has to do with what you're saying. A lot of the times, journalists, we're bridled. We're not allowed to say what we really want to say or what we think because of the organizations that we work for. Sometimes we have to have our hands tied and we have to toe the party line, so to speak. Whereas influencers or people on social media who are not necessarily journalists, they can say whatever they want. They have absolute freedom to speak their mind. And so I think a lot of people who are consuming this kind of content are looking for that. They want honesty, they want transparency. And so you can't, unfortunately, always get that in more traditional media. So in Spain, there is definitely much more of a shift, I think, towards people following people on YouTube, on Instagram, on TikTok, on Twitch, or these types of platforms. And because of that, the way that traditional broadcast media is now broadcasting is you see much more sensationalism, much more clickbait, much more headline type news, let's say, to try and capture attention. And there's less and less quality analysis to go around because everybody is trying to get the attention of everybody out there, right? And so unfortunately for me, I feel like it's a bit sad, actually, the trend that's been happening, at least in Spain. And I think in the UK, it hasn't quite gotten to that point as of yet, but you can see, like you were pointing out, that you are starting to have more of the extremes. You're starting to have pundits who are taking a certain side, and maybe they don't actually really believe it, but they're going to say it anyway because they know that it's going to get people talking about it. So.
Yeah, I mean, so for instance, there's a fairly well-known Manchester United...
Legend?
No, absolutely not a legend.
Okay. I was trying to read your mind as to who you were saying.
No, he makes social media posts, he releases videos about Mark Goldbridge. I'm talking about Mark Goldbridge.
Okay.
Talk about how he's a huge Manchester United fan. Every time there's a penalty given against Manchester United, he's, this is a terrible decision. All the Thomas Ronchero stuff, all of that, the sort of ludicrous hyper fandom. And it took sort of 2 minutes of research to find out he invented himself as a Manchester United fan 5 years ago. He's not even a real Manchester United fan. But that's the sort of most obvious end of the market, where I think you see this in a more invidious sense. For the 25 years I've been working in journalism, the money has been declining. It's constantly cut back. We're being told there are no resources, we're not making the money in advertising, readership is dropping, everything gets tighter and tighter and tighter.
That's happening in Spain as well.
Yeah, and then suddenly we got this beautiful thing 5 years ago, The Athletic come along.
And also less people, more job.
I'm sorry?
The companies also said less people, but do more job.
Yeah, more work, more responsibility.
But The Athletic comes along, and for the first time, the only time in my career, there's an injection of money into the market. Suddenly there are jobs. Suddenly, even people like me who didn't take up offers from The Athletic are able to go to our employees and say, look, I've been offered this. Maybe you could also give me this. And that's a great place to be. I'd never experienced it before. And so I was sort of welcoming The Athletic. And I think it's, broadly speaking, been a very good thing. However, there is a potential ethical crisis there, that if you are, say, the correspondent for, and let's just pluck a team at random, Burnley. Clearly, I'm not talking about Burnley. Nobody cares about Burnley. But let's say you're the Burnley correspondent, and you are judged by how many subscribers you bring to The Athletic. Then who is your market? It's Burnley fans. So your analysis inevitably is going to skew pro-Burnley. And that's, as I say, I'm using Burnley as an example. I could be talking about Liverpool, Manchester City, Manchester United, Arsenal, Tottenham, Chelsea, whoever. And those correspondents also have to maintain, this is what you were saying, they have to maintain good relations with the club. Because if the Newcastle correspondent comes along and says, you know what, I think the Saudis are terrible. This is shameful what's happened. Well, the club are going to say, well, no, you can't talk to our players. You can't come to our press conferences. Actually, you can't even come to our matches. And so they have to maintain those relations. And also, if you were the Newcastle correspondent, you said that, you would lose subscribers and you lose your job. Now, that's always been the case for local journalists. They've always had to tread that line between you can't be overcritical, but equally you have to reflect what fans think. But for The Athletic, it's because its perception is national, if not global. it seems like a more neutral body, but actually it has exactly the same problems the old local papers used to have. So far, I think their correspondents pretty much have stayed on the right side of the line. But there has to be a consciousness that that line exists. And I think there's a real danger that they step beyond that.
But what's so interesting about that, at least in Spain, is that that line, it exists with media, but it doesn't exist with social media influencers. So you see a lot of footballers that
But
are actually taking the time to either play video games with them, to have conversations with them, to talk to them about whatever it is that they want, but they will close the doors to traditional media.
Sure. But is this... Is I mean, from the outside looking at Spain, it seems a crazily bifurcated world that you've got Marca on one side, who are clearly pro-Real Madrid. So they've kind of been like a supercharged local newspaper, right? Is that
You
fair?
have Marca
or-
Nas in Madrid, and then you have Sport and Mundo Deportivo in Barcelona. So you definitely have the element of the Madrid-based media versus the Catalan media
Yeah.
as well. And so there is an element of trust that can be very difficult to sort of navigate in the football landscape between clubs, players, agents, managers, and then the
I
people
mean,
who
how
actually
is,
work
for
for these.
instance, I mean, Marca have a correspondent in Barcelona, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, and how are they perceived?
Well, a lot of people who read Marca based in Barcelona don't always necessarily believe whatever's being sort
Right.
of said by a Marca journalist, so to speak. They're more likely to trust or believe what's being said by the Catalan press, whether they work at Sport or Mundo. I mean, in general, I mean, this is a big generalization, but people in Catalonia tend to read the Catalan newspapers, and then in the rest of Spain, people tend to read the Madrid newspapers. Or if you want to know about Real Madrid, then you read Marca. If you want to know about Barcelona, then you read the other ones. So they kind of stay in their lanes in that sense
Okay,
a little
yeah.
bit, if that makes sense. But there's always, you know, political games and everything else going on behind the scenes as well too. So, whereas, yeah.
Let's continue with the supporters because it's all about supporters. The clubs, the teams, also media, also channels, and of course social media. Let me explain something about supporters. There are 5 different basic supporters. One of them is temporary supporters that, how can I give an example? Maybe you had to watch a game at your home. One of your friends called you and he or she wants to come to your home. And he's not about football or she's not about football. But with you, you are very excited. So he just watched the game with you and he's very excited. But after the game finished, he doesn't talk any from now on about football. We call them temporary supporters. Only once, maybe. He doesn't care any from now on. The second one is local supporters, which we liked most, with loyal supporters. Local, born or raised in a place and support the team of that place. And loyal, the best one for broadcasters and also for teams. Whatever happened, they will be back the team. And the other two, the fourth one is fanatic supporters. And the fifth one is hooligan. What is the difference between fanatic and hooligan? I can also give an example. Maybe there is a game in the city that night, and also in the same night, he had wedding anniversary. He prefers to go to game without his wife, watch the game, but he just remembered, oh, this is our wedding ceremony and wedding anniversary. So he just took some flowers and ran to house. When his wife opened the door, she asked, where are you? And he said, I was in the game, but I bring these flowers to you. And she just throws the flowers. We called them fanatic. Did something much, but remember the humanity at the end. But the hooligan supporters, they can do any bad thing for their teams. I think with the transformation of the traditional media to digital media, for traditional, we just kept the local and the loyal fans. We just represent them. But with the digital media, I think fanatic and hooligan supporters are increasing, and the development of increasing them is much higher from now on. Will you be in the same mind with me? This is a big question, and this is a big issue, I think, from now on.
I agree with that. And I actually think that this is a big disadvantage of the social media, because obviously you want to be controversial on social media, unfortunately, because that's what gives you the most engagement. For me, this is a disadvantage, but many people see it as an advantage. So, for example, in Poland, big newspapers that used to be like objective and just real, now they would prefer to write an article about something that happened between Alkmaar and Legia during UEFA Conference League game, and the big fight that was besides the stadium and the probably penalties that the clubs will get, rather than about just the game itself. And this is the big problem, because we are starting to see football as something bad, not enjoying it as before. And the potential people who maybe would become football fans and go with their family, for example, for the game, if they read articles like that on social media and see all these videos when the football fans, hooligans, get in the fight, they would not be so likely anymore to come to the stadium. So that's what people don't really think about when posting things like that. Obviously, clubs will not post it, but all the newspapers, for example, in Poland, they would. And I think it's really, really bad.
And also I want to ask Jonathan, because also, Semra, I want to listen you about that topic. In Turkey, there are some differences from Europe. In England, if you're born or raised in London, you have to support one of the team. Maybe it will be West Ham, maybe it will be Tottenham, Arsenal. But you did it in a passionate way. In Turkey, you can be a local supporter to any city team, but when it came to be a champion, you had a secondary team, and you support Galatasaray, Beşiktaş, or Fenerbahçe. In Turkey, this is very difficult for us. Who supports who? Every or mostly of population had a secondary team. But in Spain and in England, I don't see. So, what will go on for the local supporters, especially in England? By the way, I asked the question.
Well, I can only speak of my own experience, and I grew up in Sunderland, still the seventh most successful team in English history, even if Sunderland haven't won the league since 1936. But history counts, history's important.
Yeah, I love how you slipped that in there.
Yeah. So we're still more successful than Chelsea, that's important for now. And when I was a kid growing up, there was one kid in my school was not a Sunderland fan. He was an Everton fan because his dad was from Liverpool. The idea of not being a Sunderland fan growing up in Sunderland would seem, certainly back then, would have seemed deranged. Of course you're a Sunderland fan. And this is at a time when Sunderland were only getting 14,000, 15,000, not like now where it's 40,000. And I really didn't sort of come across people who had a second team or supported teams that they weren't directly related to, either through birth or family, really till I got to university. And I get, if you're a Cambridge fan, then maybe, I quite like Tottenham as well. Fine. They're never going to, they're very rarely going to clash. But I'd lived in Argentina for a while. I had an Argentinian girlfriend, and her family were big Boca Juniors fans. They had 2 season tickets they share between the family. I went regularly to watch Boca. I knew I wanted Boca to win, but I wasn't a fan. If they lost, I don't care. And the only reason I cared was because they'd be miserable for like 2 days. But it didn't hurt me. Whereas with Sunderland, Sunderland defeats have stopped hurting me because we're used to it. But it's still whatever Sunderland are doing has an impact on me. So I think that for my generation, the idea of having a second team feels very alien. I wonder if younger generations, because the gap is so big, I wonder if they see it slightly differently. They see it almost as two different sports. I think one of the dangers that the Premier League has is that the age of fans in the stadium is going up because the ticket prices are so high. And so it's almost like there's two different sports. Let's use the example of a Cambridge fan. If you're born in Cambridge, maybe you go to Cambridge every week because you can afford it. But maybe your treat is once or twice a year you go and watch Tottenham. But you see them almost as two different things. There's one thing you see on TV, and then there's a thing you go to. And I think one of the fascinating things in English football now, even though the Premier League is so dominant, is that attendances at every level are higher than they've been ever. In proportional terms, they're not quite as high as they were in the early 50s, but as an absolute number, they're higher than they've ever been. And I think the only real explanation for that is people still love going to games. And what they see on TV on a Saturday lunchtime, a Saturday night, on a Sunday afternoon, almost serves as an advert for the football product. And then they go and experience themselves with the 3 p.m. kickoffs lower down the league.
And it's very...
So can I just also say, what you were saying about the 5 different types of fan, as a journalist, I really don't think about fans. My job is to be a journalist. It's not to react to fans. It's to report the story.
Yeah.
And hopefully that will be a football story. If there happens to be a big fight, it's my job as a journalist to report the fight because that is the news. I'm sort of trying to... I am a Sunderland fan. Everybody knows I'm a Sunderland fan. But there's a difference between neutrality and objectivity, and you have always to aim at objectivity as a journalist. So and I hate covering Sunderland games because it's hard. I was at the Sunderland defeat to Newcastle last week. It was awful. But you still analyse the game from a position of as far as you can, an objective observer. So I'm not thinking about appealing to a fan group. I'm not thinking about how fans are going to react. And I think if you start to think like that, then you're not thinking as a journalist anymore. And your duty as a journalist should be what comes first if you're employed as a journalist. And that's where I think when you're moving into this fractured world where you have people producing content, bloggers, vloggers, people on TikTok, whatever, you have to be very careful about exactly where that ethical line is. Because obviously people who are not journalists are not bound by those ethical rules. But we as journalists shouldn't be led away from that. That's what still gives The Guardian or The Sun or The Times or The Telegraph or whoever, that's what still gives them that authority. And once we lose that, then we as journalists really are no different to the sort of amateur bloggers.
And actually, transfer news is a perfect example of that.
Yeah.
Because everybody wants to be first, rather than actually fact-checking, double-checking, checking with your contacts, checking with your sources, and making sure that the news is correct and accurate. A lot of times, so much false information gets spread just because they want to be first. And even reputable brands make this mistake.
Yeah. And the problem with that is that it's really popular.
Exactly.
The Guardian's rumour mill, every day during the transfer window, they have just a roundup of rumours. And that takes, 20 minutes to do? To go through various websites, pull it together? And it gets much bigger numbers than, my carefully thought out column I spent 3 days on.
It's also same in Turkey. I want to ask Semra this one. You represent a program and you want to talk about only technical or tactical side of the game. But you just change the channel and see only they are talking about referees, only they are talking about...
That's a very big topic in Spain, let me
Yeah.
tell you. Referees get the brunt of a lot of
the video assistant referee, the technology or something else. Then, when the ratings came, you just see you did the right thing. You just be in the field, stay in the field, but they just talk about something which can be just only for rating. So this is the biggest problem for us, to continue in the traditional media and to fight with the digital media. It is not a fight, but you have to catch the respect, you have to collect, you have to do your job, as you say, journalist, but I divide journalists into two. One of them is real journalist and the fake journalist. What can you say about it?
I think part of the struggle, part of the battle is that football is now 24/7, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Fans are no longer just satisfied with the match day experience of going to the game, watching the game, enjoying the game, maybe talking about it a little bit once it's over and that's it. They want to consume football-related news all the time, and that is a lot of airspace to fill. So you have to come up with other ways of talking about football, what's going on in the bigger picture, what's going on off the pitch. And that's where I think a lot of that comes into play, where you have to start drumming up rumors about transfer news, for example. You have to come up with other stories about certain players, what's going on in their private life, or what's going on behind the scenes at a particular club, or because you constantly have to find a way to feed the masses, because they want to consume more and more and more. They want to know everything that's going on in the life of their favorite player. They want to know everything that's going on with their favorite club. They want to know everything all the time. They want to be plugged in. They want to feel as though they're connected. And so that's why it can be so difficult, I think, for us who are traditional journalists to actually fill that void in a meaningful, legitimate, proper way. And that's where social media comes in. And you have people who can have the free reign to do or say whatever they want, who can make up stories with no consequences, who can make up news with no consequences. And there's so much fake news that gets out there, it's impossible to control. And so that's where, again, the sort of ethical lines get blurred a little bit, because now you have almost sportainment becoming a really big thing, the entertainment element coming into it now as well, and trying to find ways to make sure that people are still interested, because their attention spans are so incredibly short now as well, and trying to find ways to keep people to want to continue to listen to what you have to say or what you have to offer all the time. And it can be very, very, very difficult and very challenging as well, and that's why social media has now such a big space to do all of that.
Yeah, I can add to that as a person working in social media, as you were talking about the transfers, we would usually do like 3 or 2 posts about the transfer before we announce it officially. And it was like a mystery game with the fans that, for example, someone from Japan came in. So we were, I don't know, doing some mysteries posts, guess who will come, some, I don't know, kind of a, it was all like just a mystery post so people can guess, and also journalists didn't really like it because they would already, it's like you said, like we are playing with them and just they can't miss the void and can't be the first to announce it, because obviously, if we post something which is really obvious who will come, even though it's a mystery, then all the problems is solved, and then the articles are not that valuable anymore because all the people know who will come, because we are doing this sneak peek through the social media.
And let's talk about broadcasting rights and the change of broadcasting rights for the last 20 years. Let me give some examples from Turkey, and maybe you can add from other countries. In Turkey, the first private channels is established at the beginning of 1990s, 34 years ago. And the first encrypted channel established 1993, called Cine5. And they took the rights of Turkish Super League at that time, and they tried something new. Exactly, the digital side started 30 years ago in Turkey. an encrypted channel, only one channel, not a platform, just one channel. They just show some games of Super League, and they collect something like 700,000 subscribers. It's a huge thing for a newly building channel. Then they continue to buy the rights. At that time, I think 1996 or 1997, they go abroad and they took the rights of Premier League for the first time in Turkey. And at that time, I know the numbers, they paid £50,000 to took the rights per year. I just gave the number because in this year's beIN is the rights holder for Premier League in Turkey, and they paid more than 20 million euros per year for Premier League. So we can understand it. It's a growing industry, and we are happy about it, that it grows. But for the transformation in Turkey, Cine5 closed at the beginning of the 21st century. Then the name changed. It starts to Digiturk, one of the biggest digital platforms. Then D-Smart, which I worked for at 2007, established. And the rivalry is going on from now on. So it's good for teams. It's good for broadcasting rights holders and sellers. We are in a competition. We are in a rivalry. But nowadays, when I try to find something to add my content, to add my digital platform, I just not only think about the boxes who had D-Smart in their home. I need to go forward at the OTT platform and need to take the rights also for OTT, for the digital rights, because they are much important than when they were 5 years ago. So will it be same also in Spain when you want to build something, when you want to create a channel, when you want to fill it with a quality content? Do you just only think the traditional side, or you also think the OTT side and make new developments about it?
It's really interesting because that's something that the media landscape is trying to grapple with in Spain right now. And traditionally, you could have all of La Liga in one place, for example. Just to use an example, Movistar. But now, because rights can be so expensive, and Spain in particular is a country where economically things are not going very well in general, that you see a division in terms of...
But better than here, don't worry.
Well, we have the support and the backing of the rest of Europe, so that does help. But now you do see this sort of convergence between traditional television and OTT platforms. I mean, if you look at La Liga specifically, who has the rights right now in Spain, it's split 50-50 between Movistar and DAZN, which is exclusively a streaming platform. Unfortunately for viewers and for fans and the wider audience, it can be very frustrating because now you have to pay for various services and it can get quite expensive. And you no longer have that one place where you can just tune into to get everything that you want. And so in Spain, it is an issue, and they're still trying to figure out the best way to work it out. But you see something similar happening in the States. You see something similar happening in the
Exactly
UK.
the same
It's
as
exactly
UK.
the same.
Exactly the same, yeah.
So you have these traditional networks like Sky or ITV or whoever that maybe traditionally only had their linear channel, but now they are actually balancing it out as well with their OTT platforms and trying to get people to go to the streaming service, and they're trying to find this balance of at least reaching different ages and different audiences, because like you said, the young generations coming through, they're all on their phones, they're on their tablets, they're on their laptops, they're not actually necessarily watching traditional linear television anymore, and so they're consuming sport in a very different way. And so in Spain, it's a bit of a tricky thing right now, trying to figure out how to best make it work. because it actually has had a bit of a negative impact in that it's turned a lot of people off from actually wanting to buy and to watch sport.
Because I understand that the issue is EU competition law, right? You can't have a monopoly, which sounds great, right? Monopolies are bad, right? We sort of understand that. But actually the practical consequence for the consumer is, well, I'm paying for Sky, I'm paying for
Amazon Prime or
for Prime, for TNT.
TNT.
I was trying to think what BT Sports
Oh,
is
yeah,
called
exactly.
now. So you have to pay,
100
if you want to watch them all, you have to pay for all three. So it costs over £1,000 a year. I'm a journalist, I can charge it to people, I can claim it back off tax, it's not too much of a problem. But if you're an ordinary punter, and that I think is one of the many examples of where you can't really treat football like a normal business. I mean, I'm not suggesting for a second we should get into this now, but that I think was the most significant part of the European Court ruling on the Super League. Was it accepted as a point of law that sport should not be considered as another business, that it does have this other role that should be taken into account? So I don't quite know how that's going to play out. But I think as we get more streaming services, if anybody ever works out how to make money out of streaming, especially, but at the minute, all that seems to be happening is the price for the consumer goes up. And actually, because the advertising is going down, the TV companies of the streaming services make less money, and less money then is invested in the journalism in the product.
Correct.
Which seems just terrible for everybody, apart from the people who actually make the technology.
Hence why AI is now coming into play, right? And they're going to start replacing all of our
I have been replaced by AI.
And all of a sudden you have AI actually writing the articles from now on. But yeah.
And actually, I want to ask you for all three. I am excited to watch a game in a big screen. It doesn't change anything for me. But I cannot watch anything else. TV series, movies, or news, or something else. I don't need to find the big screen, and I just see it from my telephone or a small laptop or something else. So I think live games, because if you can just adapt yourself during 19 minutes or during half an hour or something like that. You have to catch it. You have to watch it. And the only excitement of the television is now, I think, only the live games, live sports games, nothing else. Are you in the same mind with me? Because we also accept the easiness or the benefits of social media, and it's something very easy. You can only use your telephone and make some program, and you just put it to YouTube or something else, and you don't need any studio, you don't need any lights or something like that. So it's very easy. Okay, we accept it. But on the other hand, to watch a game in a big screen and to just feel the excitement during the 90 minutes, it is something that we need to miss, and we need to continue from now on.
For me, I don't even have a television at my house, but I do have a laptop, of course, and I pay like a fee for streaming live.
You will buy when you turn back
Sorry?
to watch a game. You will buy a television then when you turn
Yes,
back.
I have like a monthly fee for a television platform. I mean, it's the best known platform in Poland, the best known TV actually, and they have their own website platform.
Is this 11 Sports?
No, it's a TVP.
Oh.
And if you go to their website, you can even have some most important games for free live. So I usually do it this way, but most of the times I'm just going to some bars and watching the game with the friends live. So obviously it's the most fun when you watch it live, not later, because on social media you will immediately have all the results, so it doesn't make any sense and it's not exciting anymore. So yeah, definitely watching live is the most important thing, but when it comes to the TV, then I don't have a TV at my house currently.
Do you not find, though, that, I mean, maybe this is just how bad Sky service is, that if you're watching it on a stream, because there's a time lag, Twitter tells you there's a goal coming like 30 seconds or a minute before the goal happens.
Yeah, this is true. For example, even in bars, when there's a big bar in Poland, let's say, and there are 2 rooms, and you have 2 televisions, and one side is luckier than the other one, because one side has it 1 minute earlier, and then you hear screaming, and then you're like, what happened? What happened? Who goal for who? And then you will see. So yeah, that's true. Yeah.
But, I mean, I think the point about live sport being the only sort of appointment TV that still exists is absolutely correct. It's been true for a long time. I mean, we shouldn't forget Sky was really struggling financially when the Premier League launched, and the Premier League basically saved Sky. It saved Rupert Murdoch, because that channel was losing hundreds of thousands of pounds every week, and he needed to get people to buy subscriptions.
And now it's the darts.
Yeah. Live sport is the one thing where you have to watch it at the same time as everybody else.
Yeah, true.
Even the best series, I watched it half an hour later, I watched it 3 days later.
You can stop
avoid
at
spoilers.
Because if you miss it, it's gone, that's it.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously you can watch it later on, but it loses
But
the
the
effect
feeling,
because
and one of the
True.
key joys of sport, I think, is sensing shifts in momentum, which often are very hard to put into words. But if you watch enough of the sport, you feel it.
And also feeling like you're part of something,
Yeah,
you're part of a
sure. Yeah,
collective,
yeah.
right? So even
Yeah.
if you're far away, you know that maybe people on the other side of the world are watching the same game as you at the same time, or people in the stadium, that you feel as though
And that's where social media is a huge
Yeah,
positive, because it makes
exactly.
that very manifest.
it bridges that gap, doesn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, I fully agree. Even when I watch it, the live stream at my home, and I don't live in a house, I live in a block of flats, and neighbors are watching as well, then you are feeling like a collective because you hear them screaming, you are screaming, and even though you're not in the same room, you're like, yes, they're our neighbors, and they are also a fan of particular club. So I fully agree with the collective, as you mentioned.
Thank you very much. Let's ask if there is any question, because time is up for us. And sorusu olan varsa alabiliriz, if you have any questions.
Bayağı çabuk aşmışız diye düşünüyorum. Hello, my name is Erden Aktuğ. I'm a traditional media member who has spent 45 years in the profession and has recently had to enter social media due to circumstances. I'm also the press consultant of this organization. I want to ask two little ones connected to each other. First, how long will this rise in digital media last? And secondly, is the extension of traditional media inevitable? Thank you for everything.
I would just say that the digital rise, I think, is here to stay.
Yeah, it's inevitable, and it will
Exactly.
ultimately be the only thing until the
Exactly.
next thing comes to replace it.
Exactly.
It's in the same way that printing replaced parchment, so digital will replace, what is replacing what we understand as traditional TV.
Exactly. I mean, who was it, Darren, talking about 10 years from now, we're going to watch holograms of footballers on a pitch, not actually real people playing. It's going to be the same thing. There's probably going to be holograms of us presenting shows and having analysts actually analyze the hologram version of the football match that we're watching, you know. So I think part of it as well, we have to look at the bigger picture. I mean, the digital landscape is so massive and it's so pervasive in so many ways across the entire business. You have virtual reality, you have augmented reality, you have... I'm trying to think of what else there. I mean, there's obviously a lot more. I'm not exactly an expert in all of the different areas that digital is going to be taking place, but I mean, it has a huge role to play in so many different aspects of
But I mean,
football.
you're already seeing that, for instance, with
Yeah.
the semi-automated offside.
True, with VAR, of course.
And
and
I'm
everything
sure
else,
the
yeah.
semi-automated will become automated. And equally, we've started to see, I mean, they tried it on Sky at the beginning of the season, didn't really work, but using similar technology where you can have the action happening on a I don't know the words, a virtual pitch in the studio,
Sure.
and they can pause it. and then the presenters can walk between
Yes,
the
yeah.
holograms and say, look, his positioning is, his shoulder's too closed here because he can't see that player making the run. And it didn't work because the technology at the moment is too clunky, but that will come.
Yeah.
And that's a really exciting thing for possibilities of analysis and broadcast, I think. And as you say, the idea that it almost doesn't matter where, say, a World Cup is held, because we'll be able to, if a World Cup is in Japan, say, I'll be able to go to a venue in London and watch it as if I were there because of some kind of hologrammatic projection.
I mean, we actually, at La Liga TV, have started doing interviews with players as holograms, as though they were in the studio with us.
Oh, really?
It's very Star Wars-y.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
How do you find that? Because presumably you're not
It's
getting visual
bizarre.
clues, right?
It's very bizarre, but it's really fascinating to watch from a viewer's point of view because obviously I'm talking to an empty space. No one's actually there, right? So it's a bit strange. I'm just talking to a wall. But the player can actually hear me, and we can see the player projected into the studio as if they were there with us.
Right,
Oh,
okay.
wow, okay.
It's really, I mean, it's...
So you are actually speaking to them, it's just that it's as if they're in the
it's like
studio.
you're talking
right,
to
okay.
Obi-Wan Kenobi or something, or I'm trying to think of who else is. I'm not great with Star Wars, but you know where I'm going with
Yeah.
this. I mean, it's really like Back to the Future in some ways. It's quite cool. So, I mean, the technology is there in many ways, and it's definitely going to have a huge impact on the media side of things going forward, no question.
Bitiriyoruz herhalde. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right.